Have you heard of sleep apnea? It's an interesting thing, about as common as asthma, but I'd only knew it existed about a year ago when I was diagnosed with OSA, or obstructive sleep apnea. Since getting diagnosed, I've been slowly doing my own research and realized just how little people seem to know about it. So, I decided to write a little video essay to hopefully shed some light on the topic, and maybe help other people get the help they need. In writing this essay, I realized that, ironically, it's kind of difficult to assemble my thoughts on sleep apnea, mostly because I'm experiencing it. All of which is to say that this video is going to be way more disjointed and rambly than I'd like, but hey, better finished than perfect. So, with that out of the way, Part 1. Sleep. Before we start talking about sleep apnea, I want to start with talking about sleep in general. We all know sleep's important, it's the foundation of a healthy lifestyle and all that, but I think people genuinely underestimate how much losing sleep can impact health, and how much sleep actually does for your body. Sleep regulates your emotions, your body, literally everything. It helps with physical healing, growth, your immune system. It's hard to stress just how important it is for a person's long-term health. Despite all that, sleep deprivation is not something that most people respect. Especially not in Singapore, one of the most sleep-deprived countries in the world, with only about a quarter of us actually getting 7 or more hours of sleep a night, according to a study done in 2022. Everyone I talk to complains about not being able to get enough sleep, or sleeping horribly, though most of them just seem to brush it off as a fact of life, something that you can't really help at all, when it really is a deeply concerning health issue. Really doesn't help that people are pretty bad at telling how sleep deprived we are, with people who sleep 6 hours a night feeling completely fine but acting as if they've been awake for 2 days straight. On top of that, work hours seem to be getting longer and longer, and if your waking life is encroached by having to do a garbage job that you hate for most of it, then it absolutely makes sense why people wouldn't want to sleep just to face another day of doing that again. And I haven't even touched on people like my personal mortal enemy and guy who steals my fries every time I order them, Gary V, who literally tells people to sleep less and treat their bodies like garbage for some imagined ideal of this is gonna make you successful eventually. My thoughts on that could fill an entirely different video essay. So, all I'll say is, I don't believe in the Protestant work ethic, and success later means nothing if I'm gonna drop dead before that. You can also see Thoughts Time's video on Gary for more details, if you're curious. Point is, if even regular I don't get enough sleep issues aren't considered with the gravity it deserves, I don't have much hope for how people would treat actual sleep disorders, which, speaking of, Part 2. Sleep apnea. There are 2 main types of sleep apnea: obstructive sleep apnea and central sleep apnea, OSA and CSA. I was diagnosed with OSA, which is where the muscles in the back of your throat relax in your sleep, constricting the airway and preventing you from breathing properly. This can manifest as snoring, but in my case, I simply stop breathing intermittently in my sleep. I want to make a point that having more fat around your neck does increase the risk or severity of OSA, but being skinny doesn't mean you don't have it, so please don't let that stop you from getting tested. For CSA, your brain or nerves don't consistently send your body the signal to breathe, so you just stop breathing in your sleep. And yes, you can have both types of sleep apnea at the same time. What joy. The thing is, sleep apnea is a relatively newly discovered condition, only discovered in 1965, and sleep science as a field of study really only got its start in the mid-1800s. All this is to say that sleep science and sleep apnea don't actually have a lot of historical data and experiments to look back on compared to other medical fields, but what we do have is still deeply concerning to me as someone with sleep apnea. As with every medical condition, a basic search for sleep apnea will get you a list of symptoms. Bad sleep, headaches on waking up, loss of memory and focus, increased risk of dementia and learning disabilities, and so on. Of course, having a list is useful to understanding what exactly can happen to someone with a condition, but I think it really removes the human lived element of having to deal with these things in daily life. For example, in hindsight, I realized that sleep apnea has been affecting my life since I was about 11 years old. My memory used to be decent, if I remember correctly, and I could imagine images in my head with almost picture-perfect quality. I gradually lost those abilities as I grew up, and it felt like my brain was slowly being replaced with cotton. That sort of feeling, that brain fog, is one of those things you can't really explain to people. You either have it, and so you understand, or you don't, and you don't. People describe it like having this thin film or haze surrounding all your perceptions, and while I don't think that's inaccurate, I think it doesn't really get across just how disconnected everything feels. I don't just feel disconnected with the world, I feel disconnected from myself. It's like all the different pieces of me are floating in the ocean and trying to drift closer together. My greatest fear was, and still is to some degree, that I might just lose all ability to recall anything, and completely withdraw into myself and live forever in that dark void. Having to come to terms with the fact that my mental abilities are continuously shrinking without any guarantee that they will ever return fully is something that I still haven't done completely. Having the way you think, the way your brain processes information completely degrade in that way is a challenge I don't really know how to describe to people. Stumbling over tasks because I keep forgetting and remembering and forgetting again is deeply exhausting and demoralizing, because every time it happens, it's a small reminder of that existential dread and fear again, and needing to repeat actions over and over again just reminds myself, yes, I failed to do this simple task again because my brain doesn't work, cuts into what little energy I do have to actually get things done. Then, of course, you get people telling you it's your fault for forgetting things, that if it was important to you or if you tried harder to remember, that this wouldn't be an issue. But let's try to link this to some published science so I don't just sit here and ramble forever. The main paper I'll be looking at is titled Obstructive Sleep Apnea, Personal, Societal, Public Health, and Legal Implications, published in 2019 in the journal Reviews on Environmental Health, a narrative review that really encapsulates a lot of the problems people with sleep apnea face. The study breaks down the effects of sleep apnea into a couple sections, but for this video essay I want to focus on three main ones: workplace effects, interpersonal relationships, and depression comorbidity. Let's start with the least depressing one, workplace effects. The paper talks about how changes in personality and reduction in quality of work, while being a common issue in people with sleeping disorders, are frequently misjudged by coworkers or supervisors, and the person is often mistakenly viewed as being lazy and apathetic. And reduced productivity, known as presentism, and the practice or habit of being absent for work, known as absenteeism, caused by OSA, frequently caused affected individuals to become unemployed. If even medical literature is saying things like this, I don't have much hope for how things actually play out in real life. Speaking of real life, my sleep apnea puts me in an extremely difficult position. I can only really sleep for 4 hours at a time with the CPAP machine on, and I usually need a couple hours when I'm basically out of commission before I can even think about getting more rest, which makes a 9-to-5 job almost impossible. Even in my extremely fortunate position of being able to live with my family and not pay rent, I'm still struggling to figure out how to earn enough money to feed myself without compromising on my own sleep. Sometimes, I feel like my options are sleep and starve, or work and shorten my lifespan by not sleeping properly. Other people with sleep apnea I've talked to have also talked about issues with working and employment, with one, working as a photographer, saying they have to spend days to recover after shoots and barely making any money at all in the process, and another who has been dealing with multiple chronic illnesses and so has been unemployed for basically the past decade. Did I mention this was the least depressing one? Then, we have comorbidity with depression, where I get to look at my favorite shape, the circle. The paper describes how depression and sleep apnea can affect each other, where the decreased sleep quality and sleep fragmentation of sleep apnea affects your mood, worsening depression, which in turn affects your serotonin levels. And serotonin is used as the principal neurotransmitters in the hypoglossal nucleus, which affects the upper airway dilator motor neurons. Meaning to say, having your serotonin levels messed with also messes with your throat muscles, which can make sleep apnea worse, and the cycle goes on and on. I've been on Prozac for almost a decade now, and learning that I also have sleep apnea shifted a lot of my perspective on how I've been living my life this whole time. My problems with memory I had initially prescribed solely to depression, and knowing that it was at best kept at bay and not improving with Prozac as treatment was definitely an improvement, but now I realize that I've only ever been dealing with half the problem at best. Again, given that this is something I've been dealing with for over a decade now, realizing that I've gotten the problem so fundamentally wrong for so long is frankly devastating. Though, maybe the most depressing part of all this is interpersonal relationships. The study itself focuses a lot on the effect of sleep apnea on the relationship between a patient and their bed partner, but I want to talk about the snippet that discusses general relationships with the people around the patient. To quote, "The affected patient's stress over personal relationships may be exacerbated by misconceptions which family and friends may have about OSA, inasmuch as they may attribute sleepiness to dullness, sluggishness, or psychological problems. This usually leaves most patients feeling lonely and unsupported by those who are closest in their social network. There are people in my life who don't know or understand the level of energy that you need to put in to consistently and constantly push through ever-increasing amounts of exhaustion forever until you die or get treatment, and seem to kind of just brush off the issue like I should be able to tap into some unlimited well of willpower that everyone has access to. But unfortunately, I don't live in a shonen anime. And maybe I am being a little ungenerous to these people, because they also hold themselves to that standard, and eventually it does take its toll on their health as well. But I don't have the luxury of pushing all my health problems to when I'm 70. I have to deal with them now, or I might not even live that long. I feel deeply guilty thinking about just not being capable of even being mentally present around my friends. And I genuinely feel like dead weight sometimes, just completely being unable to contribute anything to a relationship because so much of my time and energy is being drained away because I can't recover properly. I do still schedule anyway, and hope that I'm at least at the tired but functional stage of exhaustion that'll let me be present in a way that is slightly more than just physical, instead of having to deal with the guilt of canceling an appointment. Again. As a quick tangent, I was looking at a study that was trying to formulate a quality of life questionnaire for sleep apnea, and as part of that they got 187 people, mostly sleep apnea patients, some just snorers without a diagnosis, talk about what were the most commonly experienced symptoms they faced and what was the most important for them to resolve. And hearing people list things like a decrease in motivation to do exercise and leisure-type activities, a loss of useful leisure time, adjusting schedules to avoid activities because you might not be able to remain alert, less interest in socializing, a feeling of guilt about your relationship with family members, frustration, depression, fatigue. I sat thinking about my life in just the past month or two, trying to deal with being newly disabled in a way that really pulled the rug out from under me in a lot of ways, or rather having my body finally give in and needing to deal with that, and realizing that many of the people in the study have probably been in my position for years and just having to process all of that grief. But hey, at least modern medicine has got our back and we can safely and reliably manage our conditions to be able to live relatively comfortable lives. Right? Part 3. Sleep Science in Singapore. Generally, the recommended way of dealing with obstructive sleep apnea is to use a machine called a CPAP, which essentially blows air into your throat, increasing the air pressure there and preventing the throat from collapsing. A CPAP can help with central sleep apnea as well, but it's generally not solving the issue entirely, and so other devices or treatments are necessary. Thinking back to when I got diagnosed, there were already some issues I ran into. One of the ways people get diagnosed for obstructive sleep apnea is to get a sleep study, where you go into the hospital overnight and sleep hooked up to a bunch of machines. I'd only managed to sleep for about 4 hours, so the person administering the test told me that my sleep apnea was mild, but could be worse because they couldn't collect any data while I was awake. Given that it's very important to know how severe your sleep apnea is, so you know what treatments will work for you, being told, well, it's probably mild, go figure it out, is... Talking with others, getting snubbed like this isn't an uncommon experience. In some sleep studies, they actually use a CPAP as part of the procedure, letting the doctors figure out the ideal air pressure for each individual. However, when I was talking to someone who had done this type of test, they mentioned that the minimum air pressure they used for the test was way too low. They started at 4 cmH2O when they needed about 10 at least. And so also got misdiagnosed with needing a way too high air pressure of 15 cmH2O, and they've been experimenting on their own ever since. Side note, I was talking with them about what pressures to use, and they asked, what pressure range were you prescribed at your sleep study? To which my response was, you get prescribed pressure? This isn't to say that all doctors here are evil and trying to kill us all or whatever, but when you as a patient seem to know more than your doctor, that doubt tends to seep into everything you think about. Also, after my sleep study ended, I asked the nurse if they tested for non-24 circadian rhythms, which you can check out Leslie XP's video on, and they said they didn't test for it in Singapore. So if you have it and you can't get diagnosed outside the country, you're screwed. Non-24 is a condition that can genuinely ruin your life if you don't have support for it. And the fact that Singapore's healthcare system doesn't even have the ability to diagnose it is ridiculous. And this part is completely my speculation, but the way I was told this information really makes me unsure the person I was talking to even knew what non-24 is in the first place. After I received my diagnosis, I went for a 1-month trial of a CPAP machine, of which I only managed to use the machine for about 9 days. I'd wake up in the middle of the night gasping for air, and I needed to practically rip the CPAP mask off my face to breathe properly. Going back to the CPAP vendor, I asked if there was anything I could do about it, to which the reply was basically, you'll get used to it eventually and the problem will go away. Given that it didn't seem likely or possible that the issue would resolve that way, I returned the machine that day. Later on, I went and did some research on my own and discovered that yes, there are settings on the CPAP machine that I could use to help me resolve the issue, and the vendor likely gave the advice because they didn't want to get into any legal trouble. Having talked to other people in Singapore with sleep apnea, I've come to realize the issues I face are not uncommon and nowhere near the worst it could get. A friend I've been speaking to sees 2 different doctors for their sleep apnea, an ear, nose, throat doctor, ENT, and a sleep tech. They told me a story where they had a question for their doctors, and the ENT told them to check in with the sleep tech, or the sleep tech told them to check in with the ENT, leaving them completely without any answer whatsoever. Someone else speaking about their experiences said that the doctors refused to give them a detailed readout of a test they'd gone through, saying that their summary provided was sufficient for them. Another person who has severe central sleep apnea told me that the doctors in Singapore didn't even know what an ASV was, even though it's been used to treat central sleep apnea since 1999. They feel like the doctors have no idea what to do or what they're doing, and they just have to keep going for tests without any concrete solution. And I want to make clear this isn't just a doctor's problem either. In 2021, Philips announced a recall of a bunch of different models of sleep apnea machines because the foam they used inside it to dampen noise broke down over time and made people breathe in hazardous particles. The recall dragged on until about last month, where they had to stop selling CPAP machines altogether, and has led to a reported 385 deaths, according to MSN. Philips did agree to pay $479 million settlement fees last September, but frankly the loss in health that CPAP users still face because of this can't really be quantified in terms of money. And even if it could, up to about $1,000 per machine return definitely isn't enough. Medical mistreatment like this is unfortunately not unheard of in other fields. I hear stories about things like this all the time when talking to other chronically ill people, but it feels especially bad for people with sleep disorders because doctors are treated horribly when it comes to work and sleep. How can we possibly get good treatment if our doctor's response to us saying, "I feel exhausted all the time and I don't know what to do," is, "Yeah, me too, what about it?" Part 4. Community. In researching all of this, I keep thinking about community. When I speak to people about their friend groups and loved ones, there always seems to be a weird sort of insulation between themselves and the people they care about. I keep running into this idea of needing to solve your problems by yourself and not being someone who creates drama for the people around them. But I'm beginning to come to terms with the fact that I need people to help me, and everyone needs people to help them. It just happens to be more obvious for myself. What's the point of a community that drops someone the second they become inconvenient? If a community threatens to tear itself apart because of drama, then isn't strong enough to even be called a community. I remember something I read years ago now. The source is unfortunately completely lost to me. Telling people to round up their friends and say, "Hey, things are bad right now. The only people we can depend on to help us is each other. Anything you need. Money, time, energy. I'll do my best to give you, as long as you're willing to do the same." It takes a lot of trust to tell someone that and follow through, but if I can't trust the people that I'm closest to, then who can I trust? Unfortunately, I'm in a position where I have no real solutions. Changing the healthcare system itself is a daunting task, but I need everyone to understand that it does benefit each and every one of us to do this. And not just in a, if everyone gets better healthcare, I get better healthcare sort of way. Humans are social creatures, and we literally cannot live without each other. Making sure that the people close to you and the people close to them are alive and happy and functional directly contributes to your own health and happiness. It doesn't just take a village to raise a child, it takes a village to live as a person. It's not fair to ask you to put in effort when everyone is exhausted all the time, but unfortunately nothing will change if you don't put in the work. Progress doesn't just happen, progress is won, and if we want to win, we have to start fighting. Don't forget, we are each other, and the only way to help yourself is to help the people around you.